Welcome back to another episode where we are marking some things in my travel Bible that were formerly in my teaching study Bible, my big Bible. And if you've missed previous videos in this series, you can check them out. They're here on the Bible Tips playlist. And this time we're going to be looking at Deuteronomy. So if you haven't already, go ahead and click that subscribe button, tap the little notifications icon. Really helps this channel out. Let's jump right in and talk about some ways to mark some things of interest in Deuteronomy. Now, when it comes to the book of Deuteronomy, we spent a year teaching through the book here at Disciple Dojo. You can catch that in our Deuteronomy, the Heart of God's People playlist here on the channel. One of the big questions about Deuteronomy is how was it composed? How was it written? When was it written? Who was it written by? And it's pretty common, especially in more mainline or secular interpretive circles, to hear that Deuteronomy was composed way late in Israel's history. Like it was the found book of the Bible during the reforms of Josiah. And so people would compare the form of Deuteronomy with Neo-Assyrian vassal treaties from the 7th century BC, which would be the 600s. And even today, that's fairly common, fairly typical to see. However, other scholars have pointed out that Deuteronomy is actually a lot closer not to 7th century Neo-Assyrian vassal treaties, but actually to 14th century Hittite suzerainty treaties. So these are treaties between a suzerain, a great king, and the vassal, the one who's entering into that king's protection. And there are differences in those treaties. And when you look at Deuteronomy, its structure is a lot closer to the Hittite treaties than to the Neo-Assyrian treaties, particularly because it includes a historical prologue. That's an element that's not found in the Neo-Assyrian treaties. And it also uses love terminology to describe not just what the vassal is supposed to show the suzerain, but what the suzerain also will show to the vassal as well. You don't see that in Neo-Assyrian treaties, but you do see it in the older Hittite treaties. You also find it in the Amarna letters, which also date to the 14th century BC. So understanding Hittite suzerainty treaties and their structure makes a lot more sense when looking at Deuteronomy, and it also places Deuteronomy within the 2nd millennium BC rather than the 1st millennium BC. Now, there are other factors and other criteria to weigh, and nothing is a slam dunk case either way. You can't just say, it looks like this, therefore it dates to this time. That's just not how it works when you're dating historical documents. But it is a line of evidence, and it also helps make interpretive sense of what Deuteronomy is seeking to do. And one of the commentaries that does a great job bringing this out is Christopher Wright's commentary on Deuteronomy. Now, this is what it used to be called. It used to be part of the New International Biblical Commentary series. Now, this series is published as the Understanding the Bible commentary series, but this is my old copy, and I've had this since I was in seminary 20 years ago. And in Wright's commentary, he has, right at the beginning, a discussion of how Deuteronomy resembles the Hittite suzerainty treaties and why it's important. And so it's much more likely, rather than somebody in the 6th century trying to mirror the form of covenant treaties from almost 1,000 years prior, much more likely that Deuteronomy resembles Hittite covenant treaties because that's the cultural world in which it was first written, whether by Moses or whether by Joshua or someone contemporary or soon after the time of Moses. Either way, it reflects these Hittite treaties, and these are the parts. In treaties, you have a preamble, introduction, why this treaty is being made. Then there's a historical prologue. That's where the suzerain says, this is what brought this treaty about. Then there are the stipulations. This is what you're going to do as stipulations for being in this covenant. You're going to pay me X amount of grain every year. You're going to offer X number of soldiers if I ever call upon you. It's just, we would say in modern parlance, these are the terms of the contract. Then there would be a section in these covenants containing blessings and curses. Blessings, if you obey the covenant, if you do your part, then these are the ways you're going to be blessed. If you don't do your part, these are the ways you're going to be cursed. And the curses in Hittite suzerainty treaties, they were pretty severe. They were pretty terrifying, and they were intentionally terrifying. They were meant to say, if you break this treaty, may these horrendous things happen to you. And this was all public, and this was all agreed upon by the two parties, the vassal and the suzerain. Then there was a calling of witnesses. And usually it would be the gods of the peoples entering into covenant. So gods of the vassals would be called to witness. The gods of the suzerain would be called as a witness. This was like, it's kind of like why we have witnesses at weddings today, or why you have notary publics, somebody witnessing this document that gives it binding force. And then there would also be instructions for what's called the deposition of the covenant. So copies of the covenant would be made. And interestingly, 2 copies would be made. And one of the copies would be taken back to the suzerain's city, wherever his throne is, and deposited in the temple of the suzerain's god. And the other copy would be deposited in the temple of the vassal's god. So both parties had copies of the agreement. And then periodically, there would be an arrangement where the treaty would be brought out and publicly read, so that, new generations of people that did not actually enter into the treaty, but who are still under its stipulations, they would be reminded of their obligations, their treaty obligations, through periodic readings publicly out loud of the covenant. And what Wright notes is that each of these aspects is found in Deuteronomy. The preamble is chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. That's the first 5 verses of the book. Then the historical prologue. That's everything from chapter 1, verse 6, all the way through chapter 4. Then we come to the stipulations. And in Deuteronomy, there's 2 sets of stipulations. There's general stipulations, and this is everything in chapters 5 through 11. And then there's detailed stipulations, specific requirements of the imperial state to its vassal. And this is Deuteronomy, everything in chapters 12 through 26. So this is the bulk of the book, these 2 sections, the stipulations. Then chapters 27 and 28 have the blessings and the curses. And then in chapter 30 and in 31, there's calling of the witnesses. Only in Deuteronomy, it's not calling other gods, but it's calling heaven and earth. All of creation is witnessing the covenant that the great suzerain, Yahweh, is entering into with his vassal, Israel. And then in chapter 31, verses 9 through 13 and 24 through 26, that actually lays out the process for the deposition and the periodic public reading of the treaty. And so why does this matter? Is this just, Deuteronomy is just copying ancient treaties? No. Wright goes on to say, Deuteronomy has done more than simply apply the secular model of the vassal treaty to Israel's conceptualization of its relationship to Yahweh. Deuteronomy has transformed the political form into a vehicle for a very powerful theological message, in which the first 3 sections become the foundation for all the rest. That is, the detailed requirements of God on Israel are all founded upon the grace of God manifested in their history. This is not only a structural matter, but is also reflected in the way the very vocabulary of Israel's response to Yahweh in chapters 12 through 26 mirrors that of Yahweh's actions towards Israel in chapters 1 through 11. This priority of grace and divine action within the covenant framework will become more and more apparent in the commentary below. And then, that's what Wright is going to bring out in his commentary. But there's even more. Wright goes on to talk about Deuteronomy, in addition to being patterned around Hittite suzerainty treaties, it also has a concentric pattern. And concentric patterns are also known as chiasms. And so Wright builds upon the work of D.L. Christensen in noting that Deuteronomy has this chiastic pattern as well, this concentric pattern, where you have A, B, C, C, B, A. So A is the outer frame, and that's a look backwards, Deuteronomy 1 through 3. Then we come to the inner frame, the great peroration, Deuteronomy 4 through 11. This is Moses speaking, Moses preaching. Deuteronomy is preached law rather than just written legal code. Then you come to the central core, and these are the covenant stipulations. This is chapters 12 through 26. Then the inner frame in chapters 4 through 11 is mirrored by the inner frame in chapters 27 through 30, and that's the covenant ceremony. And then the outer frame, which was a look backward, chapters 1 through 3, is mirrored in a look forward, and that's chapters 31 through 34. And so Wright argues the intricate patterning of the material in this form, with many internal signs of literary art as well, would seem to militate against the common critical view of Deuteronomy as a book that has grown from a basic law code by a lengthy process of additions and redactions. And Wright's not the only one, obviously, that points this out. In my study Bible, one of the things I love about this particular study Bible, which I've linked in the video description below. If you wonder why this is my favorite study Bible, click on that video and watch and you'll see. But there is an article about the date of Deuteronomy that brings up a number of these points. And there's also one about the covenant treaty form that Deuteronomy follows and how it's much closer to Hittite suzerainty treaties than to Neo-Assyrian vassal treaties. The concentric, the chiasm of Deuteronomy, it isn't like a super tight chiasm. It's not an intricate chiasm. So I'm less concerned with noting this. But if you wanted to note this chiasm in your own study Bible, like we've done with the chiasm of the Genesis flood or Romans 9 through 11, this is kind of, it's arguing for a book length chiastic structure. And I don't want to go through and, underline, highlight, or even outline all of that in my travel Bible, because I'm trying to keep this as clean as possible and as simplified as possible. But if you wanted to do that, I'll put in the video description below, I'll put this information. You can highlight it however you want, maybe using the way we've done those other chiasms here on the channel. But I'm more interested in marking the specific sections that line up with Hittite suzerainty covenants. And the way I do this in my main study Bible is by just basically using Roman numerals and labeling each of the parts. So this, I've got Roman numeral 1, preamble, and it's just, there's a bracket here. It's just bracketed out. And then the next section, I just put corner brackets, and this is just done in pencil, corner brackets, and Roman numeral 2, historical prologue. And that goes all the way through most of chapter 4. And so I put corner brackets to kind of close off that section. And then the next corner brackets, Roman numeral 3, stipulations. And I don't mark the general or the specific ones. I'm not as concerned with that. But that goes all the way to chapter 27. And then the next bracket's Roman numeral 4. This is the blessings and the curses. Then there is a chiasm, I think, that's worth noting, and that's in chapter 30. If you're interested in seeing what that is, leave a comment in the video description below saying, yeah, show the Deuteronomy 30 chiasm. That one is pretty clean and pretty interesting. But the next section then comes at the end of chapter 30, and that's Roman numeral 5. That's the call for witnesses. Then Roman numeral 6 is the public reading of the treaty here in chapter 31. And then later in chapter 31, Roman numeral 7, the deposition, the depositing of the treaty into the temple of the gods, which, because this is between Israel and Yahweh, there are no other gods to take into account. And so it's deposited both copies, the suzerain's copy and the vassal's copy. That's why there's 2 tablets, not 10 commandments, 5 on one tablet, 5 on the other, like in the movies, but it's actually 2 copies of the covenant. Both are deposited in the Ark of the Covenant, which is housed in the tabernacle, because the capital, so to speak, of the suzerain's empire is right there in the tabernacle among his people, Israel. So those are the things I want to mark in my travel Bible, just so I have a reminder of those very easily right on the page. And so I'm just going to use corner brackets. I'm going to use a red Prismacolor pencil this time. It'll show up a little bit better. So here we go. So now when I'm talking about how Deuteronomy is patterned after a second millennium Hittite suzerainty treaty covenant format, I can actually turn right to specific sections and show whoever I'm talking to or teaching or preaching at the various parts and how it lines up. And it's right there on the page at a glance. So Wright isn't the only one who's pointed this out. He's not the first. This is a well-known thing, but I'll link to his commentary, the new Understanding the Bible printed edition rather than this old one. Same content though. I'll link it in the video description. This is actually one of the most readable commentaries you'll ever come across. Christopher Wright is a master of biblical exposition, but his commentaries don't read like commentaries. They read like devotionals. In fact, I used this as my daily devotional reading years ago. That's why you can see how it's kind of worn out. But I would just read a section in Deuteronomy, and then I'd read that section in this commentary, following Wright's outline. And it was fantastic. I've done that with a number of his commentaries. I recommend Disciple Dojo viewers do that. You don't need a lot of technical knowledge. This is a commentary series written at a fairly popular level. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. If you're interested in more on suzerainty treaties and why they matter for the world of the Pentateuch, for the Torah, check out Wright's commentary. Check out the Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. If you can find one, it's out of print, but you can still get them every now and then on used bookstores or online, places like eBay, or any of the resources that I mentioned here on the channel in our Black Belt Tips for Reading Deuteronomy video. I'll also link that in the video description as well. So that's all for now. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully it was interesting. If it was, we would really appreciate you showing that by subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. That's all for now. We'll see you back here next time at Disciple Dojo. As always, keep training.